The last method we're going to cover is solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula. Before I actually get into that though, I got kind of so tied up on showing you simplifying radicals from last video. I do want to quickly show that you can also see those answers that we wrote down in here. So where is it crossing at that negative 0.427 and at that positive 4.72? So you can still see it. The problem is in my math lab, it doesn't care about what the decimal is. In my math lab, it's going to want that plus or minus 2 square root 5. So you can use decimals to check, is that the same number? But you cannot just get your answer from decimals. So that is why we are learning this method. Okay, so back to the quadratic formula. We have this formula right here. Negative b, or sorry, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, if you're taking this class online, you can use your notes on your test. If you are in my on-campus class, you get a note card, so surely you're going to write that formula down. But back in the day, we had to memorize this. And you can see my daughter uses my YouTube a lot. Okay. But it kind of helps you memorize this. Here is the song. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's the Pop Goes the Weasel song. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you shouldn't need to memorize it, but if the little tune kind of helps you memorize it, then even better. Okay, now the big thing with this is you do want to make sure it's in standard form again. So by standard form, what I mean by that is that it equals 0. So this one does equal 0. So to be able to put it into our quadratic formula, we do have to be able to identify what is my A, my B, and my C. So A is whatever is in front of your x squared. So A is 1. B is whatever's in front of your x, and the signs matter. So this is negative 5. And then your C is your constant. Okay, so I have my A, B, and C. What's in front of x squared is A, x is B, constant is C. And then I like to write the formula. So, I mean, it's right here, but in general, I do like to write it. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, this looks like an intimidating formula, but it's really not too bad. Okay, once I have everything labeled and I have my formula, this is substitution. Kind of be careful right here, though. My formula says negative b, and what I mean by negative b is the opposite sign to b. So if I have negative 5, this becomes positive 5 right there. Negative 5 becomes positive. So then plus or minus the square root of b squared. You 100% have to put that b squared in parentheses, especially when b is is negative. Okay. We've went over this before, I think at the very first lesson. But if I have negative 5 squared, that's negative 25. Negative 5 in parentheses is positive 25. It's going to completely change your answer if you do not substitute that in right. So substitute in with parentheses, please. Okay, so that's my b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 2. And this is not partly over, but all over 2 times a, which is 1. Okay, now this is just cleaning everything up. So x equals 5 plus or minus. We need to figure out what number goes under the radical. And this will be all over 2. 2 times 1. So to figure out what goes under that radical, I am putting in my calculator what is under the radical. So I'm going to put it in just like that. So in parentheses, -5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, and we get 17. It goes under my radical. Okay. Now, if I could break down the square root of 17, just like I can break down the square root of 20, I need to do that. But when you have the square root of 17, this is a prime number. The only way to get to 17 is 1 in 17. I don't have a pair of anything to come out. And so this is my answer right here. Now, I do want you to recognize that this does represent 2 different answers, right? My 2 answers, I can spell, would be x equals 5 plus the square root of 17 all over 2. And x equals 5 minus the square root of 17 all over 2. So we can write both of the answers in this form, but I do want you to understand it does represent the 2 numbers, because with that x squared, that means I should have 2 solutions. Now, I don't think you have to do this in my math lab, but I do want to put this in Desmos to show that we can check our answers. So I am going to get decimal equivalents. So I'm going to do this top one into my 30 and then this bottom one into my 84. When I am putting this in my calculator to get a decimal equivalent and you have a 30, you need to make sure you use your fraction button, please. So I'm going to hit my N over D, and then I'll do 5 plus the square root of 17 and go down all over 2. It's going to rewrite it for you. So hit your toggle key, which is this double arrow. And this is roughly 4.56. We'll just leave it like that. Okay, so I don't know if you need a decimal equivalent in my math lab, but just in case you do, put it in your calculator and then toggle. Okay, rewind that if you need to see that again. If you have the 84, you have a fraction button as well. If you hit, let me do this off screen because I don't really remember. Okay. If you hit alpha, which for my calculator is this green button, but it's under a second. So hit alpha y equals, you also have an N over D button. I'm going to hit my fraction key and then type this in the way I see it. So 5 minus the square root of 17, arrow down all over 2. And this is about 0.44. Okay, so if I put this into Desmos now, my equation was x squared minus 5x plus 2. Where is this crossing the x-axis? At about 4.4, because that 8 makes that 3 go up, and about 4.56. So you can check your answers from Desmos, but my math lab will not take these 2 answers here. It will make you write it either in this form or this form here. So you do need to know how to do this. So example B, still using the quadratic formula here. And I need to rewrite this because this is not in standard form. We do not want this to equal a number. So what I need to do is move that over to the other side. Now, again, the biggest mistake when you guys do this, you guys just pick up that 8 and think you can move it to the other side like that, but you always have to do the opposite operation. So we're going to subtract that 8 over. Now, while I subtract that 8 over, I'm also going to rewrite this in standard form. So I'm going to make sure to do my x squared first, then my x, and then my constant. Okay. So what do we have now? From here, we have that a equals 3, b equals 5, and c equals -8. Do not find your a, b, and c when this is not in the right form, because you might say that your c is +8, but you're subtracting it over, it needs to be negative. Also be careful, it does not matter what number comes first. What's with the x is your b, what comes with the x squared is your a. So if you rewrite it, it just kind of eliminates all that confusion. Okay, so I have my a, b, and c. If I rewrite my formula, I now have my formula, what a, b, and c equals. So this is easy, hopefully, substitution. So this time, my b is a 5. So when I plug this in, this will be -5. Okay, I did this on purpose here. That minus b means change the sign. So when my b is a -5, it becomes positive. When my b is positive, it becomes negative. That negative b means change the sign. Okay, so -b plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I'm going to do 5 in parentheses squared. Now, technically, when your b is positive, it really does not matter if you put that into in parentheses or not. But in general, if you just put everything in parentheses, you don't have to remember when do I do it and when do I not. Just when you use substitution, use parentheses. Okay, -4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is -8. And this is all over 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, so if I clean this up, we've got -5 plus or minus. We're going to figure out what goes under that radical, and 2 times 3 means this will be all over 6. So let's again put in our calculator, not including the radical, but what's under the radical, because I still have the radical down here. So using either calculator, it does not matter. Okay. Goodness gracious. There we go. 121. Now, hopefully you recognize that that's a perfect square. If I do the square root of 121, I do get 11 here. So we can keep simplifying this even more. When this is a perfect square root, keep going. This is x equals -5 plus or minus 11 all over 6. Another common mistake that's going to happen is when we do the square root of 121 and it comes out to a nice clean 11, you guys will come down here and say that it equals the square root of 11. But there's not a square root in this calculator, so I'm not writing that on here. Because this is a perfect square, it comes out of that radical. Technically, if we were to break down 121, that would just be a nice 11 times 11. That 11 comes out of the radical. There's nothing left inside. So when that's a perfect square, do not say square root of that number. It is just that number. Now, when I get a perfect square root, I am not going to represent my number this way. You're not going to go to Lowe's and say, I need, -5 plus or minus 11 over 6 yards of fencing. I don't know. Okay. You're going to go in with an actual number. So let's get to those actual numbers here. So we are not done. My two answers. My goodness, I don't want to write that in answers, do I? Okay, our two answers is x equals -5 plus 11 all over 6. And x equals -5 minus 11 all over 6. Notice I'm not changing the sign of that -5. What I'm changing the sign of is what is in front of that 11. Now we can either do this by hand or put it in the calculator. I'm indifferent on what you want to do. If I do it by hand, we get -5 plus 11, which would be 6, and 6 over 6 is 1. So that is one answer. And then on this next one, -5 minus 11 is -16 over 6. This one, you can divide or reduce both of them by 2. So we get -8 over 3. Okay, so to show you one more time how to put this in the calculator, if I wanted to put this in N over D, 5 plus 11 all over 6, and this is -5. So we get to that 1, use your N over D. And if you are using this calculator here, you would do alpha y equals, there's your N over D. So we have -5 minus 11 all over 6, and we get -8/3. Now, as a decimal, that's -2.6 repeating. So if I was to put this into Desmos here, and I'm going to, oh my, I'm going to put this in standard form. There's my -2.6 repeating, so that's my -8 over 3, and my nice 1 right there. So we get the same answers in Desmos that I did when I did this by hand. Okay, rewatch this video if you need to. The rest of the lesson, we are going to be solving our equations by using the quadratic formula. So you can, I guess, technically rewatch this, but you're going to get a lot more practice by the time this lesson's over.